We have some very important Japanese families that settled in Monrovia and were part of building the city. Tell us about them.
The city of Monrovia dedicated a neighborhood treasure on June 8th of 2019, honoring the early Japanese American families of Monrovia. And I put together some remarks on that occasion. I'm using that as the basis of my information. I started by setting the scene in the year 1900, providing some facts about Monrovia that would help people visualize what the community looked like and felt like. The population was 1,205. Bear in mind that was only a slight increase over the population of 1890, which was 907. The local economy was still depressed after the collapse of the land boom. Citrus fruit was still the biggest cash crop. Most of the city north of Foothill was covered with citrus trees, but citrus groves existed south of Foothill as well. Monrovia Canyon Park was a hiking destination, and I say hiking because in 1900 you could only get up there by hiking. The road itself wasn't constructed until 11 years later. Library Park, as we know it, did not exist. It was largely vacant lots with a few structures on that block. The Monrovia Public Library and the Monrovia City Hall were in the Granite Bank building at the southwest corner of Palm and Myrtle. Electricity had just come to Monrovia. There were no automobiles, and the only Japanese representation in Monrovia was George, a member of the household of Colonel R.M. Baker. 3 years later, the Pacific Electric Railway arrived in Monrovia from Los Angeles, and the city began to grow once again. Yutaro Ueda arrived in California from Japan and worked on the construction of the Pacific Electric according to family tradition. That gave him an introduction to the San Gabriel Valley. 1907, Satoru Tsunishi arrived in California from Japan. And also in that same year, Shujiro Muramoto arrived in California, also from Japan. Shujiro had married Ito Tochioka in 1902, and they became the parents of 8 children. 1910, whopping increase. Monrovia had gone from 1,205 to 3,505. Citrus was still the biggest cash crop. The Japanese population of Monrovia had begun to grow. 7 Japanese males were living in Monrovia. 5 were working for private families, and 2 were employed at the La Vista Grande Hotel as a chef and a kitchen helper. Satoru Tsunishi had become a permanent residence. Dr. Blanche Weston, for whom he worked, encouraged Satoru to attend Monrovia High School, even though he had already graduated from the equivalent in Japan. He graduated in 1913 and was the oldest living graduate of the local high school when he died at the age of 99 in 1987. 1913, the first Japanese business in Monrovia, the Japanese Fruit and Vegetable Market at 714 South Myrtle Avenue, was owned by initial I, Doi, D-O-I. Shujiro Muramoto was living at 817 South Magnolia and selling fruit door to door. That little house at 817 South Magnolia still exists. 1914, Satoru Tsunishi returned to Japan to marry Sho Murakami. They became the parents of 10 children. 1915, Takumi Asano arrived in California from Japan and initially lived in Fresno. In 1917, Takumi Asano was living in Duarte, working on the Baird Ranch. The Baird Ranch was a large 122-acre property owned by William Baird, who bought it from the original owner, Captain Fitzgerald. On that location were set out some of the earliest citrus trees in the Duarte area. Satoru Tsunishi was farming in Duarte, and Yutaro Ueda was also farming in Duarte. 1919, the Doi Brothers Japanese Market was located at 709 South Myrtle Avenue, a location that no longer exists. Yutaro Ueda married Naka Shinohara in San Francisco, and they became the parents of 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. 1920, Satoru Tsunishi was farming on West Doherty Road in Monrovia. Takumi Asano was working for the Arthur Everest family. Yutaro Ueda was farming in Doherty, and Shojiro Muramoto was ranching in Monrovia. 1920, the census of that year reflected 71 residents of Japanese ancestry living in the Monrovia-Doherty area. 1921, Takumi Asano married Sake Doi in Okayama, Japan, and they became the parents of 2 daughters. I mentioned Sake Doi because I think she might have been the sister of the Doi brothers who operated the market on Myrtle Avenue. 1925, Takumi Asano took over the operation of the market at 709 South Myrtle Avenue, and Yutaro Ueda was living at 331 West Huntington Drive, and the legend of the Strawberry King of Monrovia began. By 1935, the Asano grocery store was at 617 South Myrtle Avenue, a location that still exists in an historic building, but no longer houses a market. On that occasion, June 8th, there were many, many descendants of those founding Japanese American families who were there to tell their stories, be reunited with each other, and have Susie Ling grab them for future interviews. And Susie has conducted many of those and captured many wonderful stories. The feeling of that event was wonderful, partially because I think those early families are still sensitive to the fact that they were interred during the Second World War, and they were citizens, they were business owners or farmers. I mean, they were very useful members of the community, and yet they were uprooted and left Southern California, which had been their home for several generations by this time. The essential wrongness of that has been acknowledged nationally, but I think for those families in Monrovia, this was a way of acknowledging their importance to early Monrovia and a bit of a compensation for the fact that they were so rudely yanked from the community of their adoption during the Second World War. It was a great, as I say, great event, great energy, and many wonderful interviews pursued as a result of that, thanks to Susie Lang.